Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you tonight for this very special occasion to honor a man who exemplified the meaning of the term Hall of Fame, and that, of course, is Frank Robinson. He hit 586 career home runs, which is still 10th on the all-time list. He is 12th in extra base hits, 16th in runs scored, and 21st in RBIs. He is also the only player to win the most valuable player award in both the American and National Leagues. And by the way, he brought with him from Cincinnati, when he was traded to Baltimore before the '66 season, 4 American League pennants and 2 World Championships in his 6 years as an Oriole. The Triple Crown in 1966, when he smashed the only ball ever to be hit completely out of Memorial Stadium. Frank's career as a player spanned 21 seasons, but his life in professional baseball stretched through 7 decades. He was not only what he did as one of the greatest players of all time, but the mark he left as the first African-American manager in 1975, going on to manage 16 seasons in the majors with 4 franchises, including the Orioles, and blazing a trail for the many men of color who have followed. We are happy to be joined by some of Frank's former teammates and players he coached or managed with the Orioles, fellow co-workers from his years as assistant general manager in Baltimore, and friends. And we are especially pleased to have Frank's wife, Barbara, and daughter, Nichelle, who have come from Los Angeles to join us. Please welcome them. It's great to have you here. On opening day, the Orioles honored Frank's memory with donations of $20,000 each to 3 organizations that align with Frank's values and the role he played in expanding opportunities for men and women of color. The Reginald F. Lewis Museum of African American History and Culture here in Baltimore, the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Tonight, the city of Baltimore wishes to honor Frank, and here to read a proclamation from the city is the acting mayor, the Honorable Bernard C. Jack Young. Jack.
Proclamation, Frank Robinson Day, April the 6th, 2019. Whereas Frank Robinson was a trailblazer, he served as Major League Baseball's first African-American manager and was one of the greatest players of all time during his 21-year career. And whereas, as an outfielder for the Baltimore Orioles, Frank was a standout in the 1966 season. He was named MVP and helped Baltimore bring home its first World Series championship. And whereas Frank is also the only person in the Oriole organization's history to serve as player, coach, manager, and front office executive. And whereas earlier this week, a portion of 33rd Street, the former site of Memorial Stadium, was dedicated in his honor, Frank Robinson Way. There is also a bronze statue of Frank at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. And whereas today we celebrate and salute Hall of Famer and the Baltimore Oriole legend, Frank Robinson. Therefore, I, Bernard C. Jack Young, ex officio mayor of the city of Baltimore, do hereby proclaim April the 6th, 2019 as Frank Robinson's Day in Baltimore, and do urge all citizens to join in this celebration. Ex officio Mayor Bernard C. Jack Young. That feedback was killing me.
It was just great. Sounded fine. Jack, thank you very much. Frank was elected to the Hall of Fame in 1982, getting 89.2% of the votes in the first year that he was on the ballot. Joining us this evening is the president of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown. Please welcome Jeff Idelson. Jeff.
Thank you, Gary. On behalf of Hall of Fame Chairman Jane Forbes Clark, our board of directors, the Hall of Fame members, and our entire staff in Cooperstown, it's an honor to stand before you this evening. The Baseball Hall of Fame embraces the qualities of character, integrity, and sportsmanship, and there's no one who embodied those traits more so than Frank Robinson. Those qualities are a big part of the reason Frank was respected, not only in Baltimore, Cincinnati, and Cleveland, but universally everywhere baseball is played. Frank was seemingly born destined for greatness. Scouts began to notice him 2 years after he got his first glove, when he was starting for his American Legion team in Oakland at the age of 14. And well before he played his first Major League game in 1956, one of the game's great talent evaluators, Branch Rickey, who had signed another trailblazer, Jackie Robinson, a decade earlier, called Frank the greatest prospect in the game today. All Frank did in 1956, when he got his shot, was hit 38 home runs, lead the National League in runs with 111, as a 20-year-old winning National League Rookie of the Year honors. After 10 years in the Queen City, he was traded right here to Baltimore, where he continued to torment pitchers and rattle infielders with his hitting and aggressive base running every single day. As Frank said during his induction speech in Cooperstown 16 years later, reflecting on his move to the Orioles, I think the trade is what really turned me around as a player and as a person. Going to Baltimore was a turning point in my life. And in his first year here in Baltimore, Frank became the first player since Mickey Mantle 10 years earlier, and still today, the only African-American to win a Triple Crown. He led the league in runs. He was the American League's MVP. Frank made history on October 3rd, 1974, when the Cleveland Indians appointed him the first African-American manager in baseball history. This was 8 years after his high school basketball teammate, the great Bill Russell, became the first African-American coach in the NBA with the Boston Celtics. Rachel Robinson was in Cleveland on opening day in 1975. Frank said at the time, "I was very proud that Rachel would make the trip. I hoped and wished that Jackie could have been here. The next best thing was having her here because it kept me focused." The common thread between Frank and Jackie Robinson, beyond their massive and pioneering contributions to desegregation and equality, was that neither wanted to be remembered as a pioneer, but for what they accomplished on the field. In fact, Jackie told the baseball writers after he retired that when considering him for election to the Hall of Fame, it should be for his playing career, not for being the man who integrated the modern game. Frank knew early on that he would face his share of obstacles in life, as Jackie had. And rather than allow those obstacles to define him, they both channeled their frustrations to improve their playing abilities, and they both developed strong leadership qualities. Neither Jackie nor Frank wanted recognition. They wanted results. And both worked tirelessly to bring racial equality to our national pastime. 5 years after his indelible career came to an end, Frank was elected to the Hall of Fame in his first year on the ballot. He and the equally talented Henry Aaron were the only two players elected by the baseball writers in 1982. The class also included Travis Jackson and Commissioner Happy Chandler, who had presided over the game's integration 35 years earlier. When I was speaking with Hank earlier this week, he mourned the loss of a friend. Frank and I were close on and off the field, Hank told me. I will always be grateful that we broke in around the same time and that we went into the Hall of Fame together. He was an incredible player, immensely talented. He gets the credit he richly deserves for his playing ability, but never got the credit he deserved for just how great of a person he was. My only personal regret is that he had something I always wanted but could never achieve, winning the Triple Crown, which is an amazing achievement. At the end of the day, what matters most is friendship, and I sure do miss my friend. Hall of Famer Joe Morgan, who grew up in Oakland like Frank, had a very close relationship with him and called him an inspiration. Joe told me, "Frank was the guy we followed growing up, starting when he was in American Legion ball. I was 12 years old when he broke in with the Reds, and I had aspirations of being the next kid out of Oakland to follow in his footsteps. He was an inspiration to all of us kids back home. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to proudly wear a Reds uniform like he did, and the honor of playing for him, the only African-American manager I ever played for in my entire life. In closing, for those of us who are fortunate to have our lives touched by Frank, we're all the better for it. And now we have a responsibility to pass his passion and respect for baseball along to this and future generations. It's what he would have wanted. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you very much. Our next speaker was in his second big league season when Frank joined the Orioles in 1966. He went on, of course, to the Hall of Fame, a great career of his own, involved with the Orioles organization now for over 50 years. My broadcast partner, please welcome Jim Palmer. Jim.
Thank you, Gary. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here this evening. I had a chance to go to the celebration of life for Frank out at Dodger Stadium on February 24th. I sat there, luminaries from basketball. Hank Aaron was there, former Commissioner Bud Selig, Rob Manfred, some of the greatest players that ever played the game. They were there to celebrate Frank and what he meant to not only them but to baseball. And I'm reminded of what Nichelle Robinson said at the end of the ceremony, and that's help us get through this. So I just want to thank all of you for coming tonight to do exactly that. I think anybody that knew Frank, it was kind of interesting to sit there and listen to everybody describe him. I thought I was going to have to talk that afternoon, so I had some notes, and I was amazed at some of the life lessons that I personally learned from Frank, but that I read about after his death on February 4th. I had the willingness to push myself. I tried to be better than I was. That was Frank Robinson. People have asked me, you know, you were his teammate, you played for him in Puerto Rico. What kind of guy was he? I said, well, Frank was tough. He was talented. He was funny on occasion. He could be constructively critical. He could be very supportive, both as a manager and as a teammate. I can recall it on the 24th at Dodger Stadium. One of his close friends, Len Coleman, who had been National League president, said, sometimes it's tough to get to know Frank Robinson, but when you do, he's like a marshmallow. I don't know if I ever saw that side of Frank, but he was a very special person. Gary alluded to the fact that I was in my second year with the Orioles when Frank got here in 1966. Let's kind of put this in the proper perspective. We were a good team in 1965. We won 94 games. Twins won 102, so we finished second. Frank came over. Bill DeWitt, who was the general manager in Cincinnati, said he was an old 30. Well, this old 30 guy, he had hit 324 home runs. He had driven in over 1,000 runs in 10 years. He's a 303 lifetime, a batting average, stole 161 bases. He'd been the most valuable player in 1961, and 62 had a better year. But Maury Wills, Willie Mays with 49 home runs and 140 RBIs had a better year, so he finished fourth. He was a special player. Now, on a personal note, first time I ever saw him play, we have an inter-squad game. Frank gets there late, takes batting practice for the first time since the season before. We had a guy, Steve Cosgrove. In today's parlance, he had great spin rate on his fastball and his curveball. He gets two quick strikes on Frank, throws him a perfect curveball low on Frank, away. Frank stays back, hits it down the left field line off the chalk line. And I turned to Dick Hall, one of our relievers, one of my good friends, and I said, I think we just won the pennant. Now, in 1966, I thought I was going to the minor leagues. I had pitched in 27 games in 65, mainly because I had to be with the Orioles that year. So I thought I was going to Rochester. So how do you make a ball club? Well, after, I don't know, 9 innings with 15 left on base, I got a chance to start. I pitched 5 no-hitters against the Yankees on a night game in Miami. Al Donning threw a low and away changeup, and Frank hit it over the scoreboard, over the clock, into the wind about 450 feet. We won 2-0. Opening day, I pitched up in Boston. Brooks hits a home run. Franks hits a home run. I throw 177 pitches. I hit a home run, end up winning 15 games, and we're on the way to the World Series. Gary alluded to the fact that Frank was the only guy that ever hit a home run out of Memorial Stadium, but let me also put that day in perspective. It was the second game of a doubleheader. I went back and looked at the box scores. I don't remember this. I pitched the first game, pitched a 3-hitter, complete game, and then Frank, he goes 5 for 7 with a single, a double, a triple, and 2 home runs. That's Frank Robinson. Later in the year, if you want to know how you get to the Hall of Fame, I give up a 2-run home run. Frank strikes out the first 3 times against Cash Fitzhunter, comes on in the 9th inning with 2 guys on base, hits a 3-run home run down the right field line. We win the game. I get 268 wins and get on the way to the Hall of Fame. The interesting thing about Frank being the first African-American manager, he just didn't hit 586 home runs and announce to everybody that I want to manage. He went to Puerto Rico for 2 years. I had the luxury and the good fortune of actually playing for him in 1968 when I hurt my shoulder. I had given up 10 runs and 14 hits in instructional league, and I went to Puerto Rico. I don't know if he saw those numbers, but the only thing he told me, stay ready. My arm got well, went back into the upper 90s, went 6-0 with a no-hitter, and one of the reasons I had success was because Frank believed in me. I'm going to leave you with one story. Frank Robinson was an intensely prideful man. We're playing in Boston. He hits a ball he thinks is going out of Fenway Park. He doesn't run. Imagine that. Frank Robinson doesn't run a ball out. Ball goes off the top of the wall. Carl Yastrzemski catches it, holds him to a single. We win the game like 11-3, 11-4. When Earl Weaver goes into his office after the game, there's a little note. I embarrassed the ball club, I embarrassed myself, and I embarrassed baseball. It'll never happen again, with a couple of $100 bills. That's what Frank Robinson was always about. The one thing, one of my favorite quotes, when you're good at something, Walter Payton said this, you'll tell everybody. When you're great at something, they'll tell you. Frank Robinson was one of the greatest players that ever played, and I cannot tell you how fortunate, how proud I not only had to be as his teammate, but also as a dear friend. May you rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Not only did our next speaker team up with Frank for many years in the middle of the Orioles batting order, but he was a member of the Cleveland Indians when Frank broke the color barrier as baseball's first black manager. Please welcome Boog. Boog Powell.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. My thanks to the Orioles for the chance to participate in this celebration of Frank Robinson's life and pay tribute to number 20. My sincerest condolences to Barbara, Nichelle, and the Robinson family. Our hearts are with you. When Frank showed up in Miami in spring training in '66, we really didn't know what to expect. He brought a hard-nosed, no-nonsense way of playing the game. Take no prisoners. We might have won without him, but with him, it was a no-brainer. From the beginning of the season, he said, hop onto my coattails, boys, I got this. And I was fortunate to be on deck for most of the time Frank was an Oriole. It was like watching Picasso at work. And when Frank took Louis Tiant all the way out of Memorial Stadium I asked him when he came in, I said, "You get it all?" And he said, "No." He said, "I might have broke my bat." And I said, "Yeah, right." What a bomb that was. And it was never repeated. Frank went on to win the Triple Crown, and I had a front row seat. We made it into the World Series that year when we're facing the mighty Dodgers. In the first inning, Frank hit a homer off of Don Drysdale. Brooksy hit a homer the next at-bat. And we were off to the races. We were in the World Series 4 times in 6 years, and we had more fun playing than you could ever imagine. And then when Frank became the first black manager in baseball, I was fortunate to be with him again. He was not only the manager, but a player too. And before his first at-bat, I told him, "You might as well go deep." And he hadn't had any batting practice or anything, and he went out there and he went deep. It was amazing. Not only did he have to make up the lineup, but he hit a tater in his first at-bat. Later on that season, we'd lost 5 or 6 in a row. So Frank, as the manager, put 9 numbers in a hat and had all the starters pick out a number, and I picked out number 1. So I was the leadoff hitter that day. Dropped down a bunt, beat it out. True story. The next day, I was hitting 4th. When I came back to Baltimore and started my new career selling barbecue, Frank was working in the front office. One day I heard somebody calling my name, and I looked around, and it was Frank in the 2nd story of the warehouse building. He said, "Hey, how about throwing me up a pit beef?" So I wrapped one up and threw it up, and a minute later, he threw it back. I said, "Hey, Frank, what's wrong?" He said, "No barbecue sauce." So I put some sauce on it, put a little Tabasco on it, and threw it back up. We still chuckle about that. But it was an honor and a privilege to play with and to play for Frank. Most of all, to be his friend. Thank you.
Boog, thank you very much. Frank is one of 2 players to win League, All-Star, and World Series MVP awards. And the other is our next speaker. Please welcome our Hall of Famer, Brooks Robinson. You're on your own.
I'm on my own, okay. Thank you very much. This is a sad day for me and for Oriole fans, and especially Barbara and Nichelle Robinson. I had a chance to speak to Frank over the last couple of months, and believe me, I shed a few tears this past week, these few weeks. Jim Palmer and I were fortunate enough to go to California to see the memorial service there, and it was wonderful to see how Frank brought people together from so many different sports. Bill Russell, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, just to name a few. When Frank got traded here, it was a lucky day for me, the team, and the Oriole fans. As far as greatness is concerned, he is in an elite class. Like players like Mantle and Mays and Aaron, he could do it all. We started winning and got in 4 World Series when Frank arrived, and that was in 6 years. After all of this, I was saddened to see when he was traded. As you know, Frank and I had the same name, and we had a lot of fun together. Usually when we had arrived in a city for the first time, the local papers would send out a photographer to take a picture of the Robinson brothers. Most of the time, the photographers didn't know a thing about baseball. So he was a little more of a surprise when he saw us and expected brothers. Either Frank and I would say, "We're not brothers, we're just cousins." We had a young team back in 1966 with Paul Blair, David Johnson, Andy Etchebarren, and a few more. And when Frank came over, everyone waited to see what kind of guy he was. Believe me, he fit perfectly with our club right away. Our whole group, our team got along well, and Frank was a lot of fun. He was just what our team needed. He was also the judge of our kangaroo court, and we only had this kangaroo court when we won. He wore a rag top on the top of his head, and he called the court to order after the game. Whoever said or whoever had the weakest swing that night had to carry a half a handle of a bat in the next road trip. The guy who made the worst play in the infield carried an old ragged glove. And the guy who made the worst base running mistake had to carry an old shoe. If one accidentally started to run the field before a third out or said something stupid during the game, he had to pay a dollar fine too and went to charity. Frank took great pleasure in giving out the punishment, and we did have a lot of laughs. We both retired from playing. Frank and I would see each other often. In July, we'd see each other at the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, and a lot of events and appearances throughout the year. We kept up with each other's family also. As I said before, this is a sad day, but it's also a day to celebrate this day and I'm happy to have been a part of his life. He certainly brought people together. Nichelle and Barbara, we're thanking with you. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooksy. On behalf of the Orioles organization, and especially you, the fans, thank you, Frank Robinson, for all you did for the Orioles, for the game of baseball, for the men and women of color in all walks of life. We are grateful not only for the memories that you gave us, but for the example you set on and off the field. To conclude this evening's ceremony, please turn your attention to the video board in center field for a look back at the career of Frank Robinson.
We had fun playing the game. We enjoyed each other. Teammates, they made it easy. We played the game, as they say, the Oriole way. The Oriole way is the correct way of playing the game.
And I think going to Baltimore was a turning point in my life. I said, hey, look, you're going to a good ball club. If you go over there and just do what you're capable of doing, maybe you can help them win. And I really didn't realize what a great situation I was walking into. Not only was I walking into a good ball club and being associated with some outstanding individuals, I was walking into a great situation as far as an organization is concerned. It's the greatest organization that I feel like in baseball.
This is a very special place in my heart, Baltimore. It always has been since I came here, and it always will be. And you, the fans, have made it that way. My family and I are grateful for this. And I am very proud to have played here for 6 years. And I'm glad that I was able to help this team win 2 world championships. I want to thank you all wonderful fans that made me feel comfortable here in Baltimore. And I'm glad you stood behind our ball club because we couldn't have done it without you. You know, I've been told many, many times that when you come to the end of a road and it looks like it's an obstacle there to stop you, if you would just take the time to maybe look on the other side, there's better things there.
But the love affair that I have with Baltimore, the organization, the city, the love affair we have still goes on. To all my friends in Baltimore and wherever, I love you.